And Wittgenstein's views on the boundary of language changed significantly between his earlier and later periods of thought, we all know. And I'm interested in his later thought. But I should first concisely say something about his earlier status ideas on this, which are relevant to the understanding of his later thought. The Tractatus specifies the general form of the proposition. The statement that is not of that form makes no sense, and one of the book's aims is to draw the boundaries of sense. That's from the Vorwort. I give the quotations in German. I'll read them also. Das Buch will also dem Denken eine Grenze ziehen oder vielmehr nicht dem Denken, sondern dem Ausdruck der Gedanken. Die Grenze wird also nur in der Sprache gezogen werden können und was jenseits der Grenze liegt, wird einfach Unsinn sein. So that's I use boundaries for Grenze, although in the existing translations, sometimes it is translated limit, sometimes boundaries. So I use same terminology. The meaningful statement, according to the Tractatus, is a truth function of the basic sentences or statements, let's say. And here we have it. Der Satz ist eine Wahrheitsfunktion der Elementarsätze. And whichever sentence is not such function, even if it resembles a statement, is nonsense. And in this way, the boundaries of language are determined. Angenommen, mir wären alle Elementarsätze gegeben, dann lässt sich einfach fragen, welche Sätze kann ich aus ihnen bilden. Das sind alle Sätze, so sind sie begrenzt. So that's the Tractatus. The boundaries of language are in the Tractatus razor sharp. You have the experience of hearing German in Israeli accent. Right. Now we move to the later philosophy. In his later philosophy, starting sometime in the early mid-30s, there's no unique sense of meaning. Here's a quotation from the Investigations. Wenn wir sagen, jedes Wort der Sprache bezeichnet etwas, so ist damit vorerst noch gar nichts gesagt. Es sei denn, dass wir genau erklären, welche Unterscheidung wir zu machen wünschen. Wittgenstein uses here bezeichnet, signify, because he refers back to the translation, to his translation of the opening quotation from Augustine, section 1, where we read, for instance, that's Wittgensteins translation of Augustine. So lernte ich nach und nach verstehen, welche Dinge die Wörter bezeichnen. But Wittgenstein equally means meaning, Bedeutung, as we actually learn from the immediate continuation in which the words ohne Bedeutung are mentioned as an example of something contrasted with words that do signify. So, and we'll get back to it soon. So this is about the vagueness of what we mean, or the context dependence of what we mean by having a meaning, and this plurality of meanings agrees with the relation of meaning to use. This is something that everybody, not only in this room, is familiar with. Man kann für eine große Klasse von Fällen der Benutzung des Wortes Bedeutung, wenn auch nicht für alle Fälle seiner Benutzung. Dieses Wort so erklären. Die Bedeutung eines Wortes ist ein Gebrauch in der Sprache. What is the use? But just making useless sounds or idling? The answer will depend on our interests. I think that here, wenn auch nicht für alle Fälle seiner Benutzung, he might have in mind things like, my life doesn't have any meaning. That's not what he's talking about. Now, immediately, so I would like to substantiate the context-dependent what is a use, what doesn't have a use. Immediately after saying that we declaim that every word in language signifies something, we say nothing, unless we, the distinction we want to make is clarified. It provides an example. Es könnte ja sein, dass wir die Wörter der Sprache 8, this is a block, pillar, there, here, red, yellow pieces of paper, and what else? A, B, C as numbers. Der Sprache 8 von Wörtern ohne Bedeutung, so to say, unterscheiden wollten, wie sie in Gedichten Lewis Carrolls vorkommen. Words in Lewis Carroll's poems, like those italicized here, Jabberwocky, can serve no such purpose. Those British and the slightly toes did Garin, Gimble, and the Green. Now, are these words simply without meaning, simply nonsensical? Wittgenstein mentions Lewis Carroll several times in similar contexts in the Nachlass, the late work. In the big typescript, which was typed by April 1933, we find the following characterization of a sentence. Was ist ein Satz? Vor allem gibt es in unserer Sprache einen Satzklang. Darum sind unsere Gedichte wie die Lewis Carrolls. Und was wir oft Unsinn nennen, ist nicht eine beliebige. So, nonsense as in Lewis Carroll's nonsense poems is not arbitrary. The sentences sound meaningful. Now, don't we have Wittgenstein 8? Verstehen wir Gedichte von Christian Morgenstern oder Lewis Carrolls Gedicht Jabberwocky? This question zeigt sich hier klar, dass der Begriff des Verstehens fließt. And you know, when Alice hears the poem, she says that it seems pretty, but it is rather hard to understand. Somehow it seems to fill my head with ideas, only I don't exactly know what they are. I think that in a sense, on the poem, I can say things about it. Those are, or might be, frumious. There is the frumious Bandersnatch. So his recommendation, if you see something frumious coming your way, better be cautious. Later, in the investigations we find, auch ein Unsinngedicht ist nicht Unsinn in der Weise wie etwa das Lallen eines Kindes. So, are Lewis Carroll's poems indeed nonsense poems? Depends what you mean by nonsense. All this suggests that according to Wittgenstein's late thought, if we say language has a boundary, I'm back to boundaries, language has a boundary, we have so far said nothing whatever, unless we explain exactly what distinction we wish to make. So this is from discussing his notion of meaning, of Unsinn, and so on in the light. So now I turn to statements about boundary of language, in the investigations. When we do that, we should remember that the first part of the investigations consists of remarks that were written between 1929 and 1946, typed in the typescripts we have, and a few remarks were added later in handwriting. Namely, it is not to be assumed that remarks written over a period of almost 20 years present a uniform position. Remark 119 is the only one that in the investigations that uses the phrase boundary of language. Die Ergebnisse der Philosophie sind die Entdeckung irgendeines schlichten Unsinns und Beulen, die sich die Verstand beim Anrennen an die Grenze der Sprache the only appearance of this place geholt hat. Sie wollen lassen uns den Wert jener Entdeckung erkennen. This contains a commitment to a boundary of language, and apparently a non-contextual one. This is at least implied, I think, by this phrasing. Earlier, rejects such a boundary. When we try to answer this, so you see, it seems to disagree with it, right? When we try to answer this question, we should bear in mind Wittgenstein's method of composition and his views about his own remarks in the investigations. Is something that wrote in his memoir from Wittgenstein's visits in 1949. In one of our walks, Wittgenstein said that if he had the money, he thought he would have his book, not one of the investigations, monographed and distributed among his friends. He said that it was not in a completely finished state, but that he did not think that he could give the final polish to it in his lifetime. The plan would have the merit that he could put in parentheses after a remark expressions of dissatisfaction, like, this is not quite right, this is fishy. So that's Wittgenstein about the investigation. As I see it, Wittgenstein included remarks in the investigations if he thought they make a worthwhile point, not if he thought that they are completely precise. After the initial writing of a remark in his notebook, he would hardly revise it, even if it contained or suggested something with which he disagreed. This fits his conception of the remark as related to a poetical unit. Or, as I'm sure all of you recall here, Philosophie dürfte man eigentlich nur dichten. This is the remarks. And to show disagreement with something that you find in a remark, very often he wouldn't revise the remark. It's a poetical unit. He would add a remark which is more precise on that point. I think this is clear in the remark 133 and the note added to it. Remark 133 ends with, es wird nun an Beispielen eine Methode gezeigt. Die Reihe dieser Beispiele kann man abbrechen. Es werden Probleme gelöst, beseitigt, nicht ein Problem. This remark first occurs in manuscript, I write it here, yes, 112. We have the exact date, 25th October 1931, so early. At least suggests that there is a single philosophical method. But although by the late 30s, Wittgenstein no longer thought that there is such a single method of philosophy, this did not bring him to revise or dismiss this remark. What he does instead is add a remark clarifying his position. Es gibt nicht eine Methode der Philosophie, aber gibt es Methoden, gleichsam verschiedene Therapien. This comes from February 38, so about 6.5 years after that remark. And he copied this remark 7 times until he put it in a slip into the typescript. Namely, we should use the Nachlass with its dates and different versions to decide about Wittgenstein's developing views, which it often contains. And I should do the same with the idea of a boundary of language. The remark we read earlier was written on 25th July 1930 and remained unchanged ever since. At that stage, July 1930, Wittgenstein is still holds much of the Tractatus view of meaning and of philosophy, and this remark fits that. But shortly afterwards, in agreement with our analysis earlier, he becomes critical of the idea of such a boundary. He stopped writing about boundaries of language after 1933. So this is again based on search of the loss. The only remark which later uses the expression Grenze der Sprache, copied again and again, is the one that ended up as this 119 remark. The latest other remarks, which still use the phrase, are found in the big typescript, as we've mentioned, typed by April 1933. Three occurrences, all typed. Namely, the manuscript sources are even earlier than April 1933. But already in the big typescript, we find a later remark added by hand. Die Logik zieht ihrem Wesen nach Grenzen, aber in der Sprache, die wir sprechen, sind solche Grenzen nicht gezogen. Das heißt aber nicht, dass nun die Logik die Sprache falsch darstellt oder eine ideale Sprache. Sie porträtiert die farbige, verschwommene Wirklichkeit als Federzeichnung. Das ist ihre Aufgabe. There's no punctuation mark between Federzeichnung und das ist ihre Aufgabe in the manuscript. Now here, he talks about boundaries that logic draws apparently within language, not of language. But it is likely that the sharpness of logic's boundaries characterizes also those of logic as a language, and they do not exist in the language we speak, as it here. Please. He rejects here clear boundaries, probably off language as well. This still exists in logic, but the purpose there, according to this remark, remains unclear. This remark didn't find its way to later work. I think the purpose of these boundaries in logic, the purpose of this is not completely clear. Perhaps because of that, the idea later was replaced by other claims. So this is handwritten addition to the big typescript. A little later, in manuscript 114, written in late 1933, I rely mainly on Schulte's descriptions of all these sources in the Bergen archive. We find the idea of boundary of language explicitly rejected. But this is long. It talks here about Regel, Satz, Sprache. You see, you can't even see, okay. I'm not going to read all of this. Diese Abgrenzungen können klar gezogen werden only in specific cases. Dagegen ziehen wir dort meist keine Grenzen, wo wir sie nicht brauchen. And now we have a wonderful simile. Es ist wie wenn man für gewisse Spiele nur einen Strich mitten durchs Spielfeld zieht, um die Parteien zu scheiden, das Feld aber im Übrigen nicht begrenzt, weil es nicht nötig ist. The main focus of this remark is the concept of plural, but that of language is mentioned as well, and we don't draw boundaries to language where we don't need them. I think that the concluding remark in parentheses reminds us of concepts that Weissman later called porous or open texture. And indeed, the idea has its origins in Wittgenstein's work. A few pages later in the same manuscript, we find the idea of boundary of language, simply like that, finally rejected. The remark did end in the investigation. So here we should read it, I guess. Zu sagen, diese Wortverbindung hat keinen Sinn, schließt sie aus dem Bereich der Sprache aus und umgrenzt dadurch das Gebiet der Sprache. Wenn man aber eine Grenze zieht, so kann das verschiedenerlei Gründe haben. Wenn ich einen Platz mit einem Zaun, einem Strich oder sonst irgendwie umziehe, so kann das den Zweck haben, jemand nicht hinaus oder nicht hineinzulassen. We have different aims for boundaries. Es kann aber auch zu einem Spiel gehören. Die Grenze soll etwa von den Spielern übersprungen werden. Yet another thing, oder es kann andeuten, wo der Besitz eines Menschen aufhört und der des anderen anfängt. It's not the beginning or end of meaningfulness, etc. Say, and now we have something which echoes what we saw earlier about signification. Sehe ich also eine Grenze, so ist damit noch nicht gesagt, weshalb ich sie ziehe. The same idea. And the idea of boundaries of language disappear from his thought. Anything resembling what we had in the earlier tractatus. This in technical language, the distinction between sense and nonsense is shown unacceptable. So what can be kept from that 119 remark? I think we shouldn't commit ourselves to an unequivocal boundary of language and of sense, definitive of nonsense. However, exposing nonsense in less technical sense, nonsense generated through misunderstanding, also of our language, in saving us from the bumps this caused, this remains a legitimate and valuable aim. As I've said, okay. With this, more or less I end. I'll just say something about these considerations of the boundary of language. I think that they have methodological implications for our philosophical investigations as well. To claim, to insist that a certain, let's say, metaphysical position, I don't think that people around this table often engage with metaphysics, to claim, insist that the metaphysical position is meaningless because it falls outside the boundaries of language. I think we find this in criticisms of metaphysical and other claims made by people coming from a Wittgenstein perspective. I think that this is not the right approach to pursue. By claiming that something is meaningless, quote Wittgenstein, we have so far said nothing whatever, unless we explain exactly what distinction we wish to make. That approach, I think, is as follows. If we don't recognize our lack of understanding of our concepts and their connections, we might start building castles in the air, Luftgebäude. I think castles in the air, castelli in aria, is a better translation of Luftgebäude than houses of cards, which is actually corresponding the first time it started corresponding because our aim should be to expose and remove such misunderstandings. In this way, eliminating the apparent need for metaphysical constructions and eventually leaving the actual use of language as we have found. Thank you.